the historical background of kind of what we have as ethics today and sort of the standards that we have, it all started from the Nuremberg Trials that happened after the Second World War. So the Nuremberg Trials took place between 1945 1949, and this created the Nuremberg Code. And so basically the war crime trials were, it's all about the horrific medical experiments that were conducted during the Second World War by the Nazi doctors on Jewish prisoners. And so they were doing terrible, awful things. And things like, testing how pain, affects various different things. And so they were inflicting pain intentionally and sometimes doing things like, I've read about things like removing limbs to sort of see how they function. And also if they had twins, they would like do something to one twin to see if the other could feel it. And they were doing like lobotomies or things like that. And so just awful, awful stuff that was criminal, which is why there were the war crime trials. So this Nuremberg Code then basically arose from these war crime trials as a way to provide at least some basic guidelines for if research is being conducted using human participants, what are the basic requirements in terms of ethics? Because we have to remember that anytime we're doing research on humans, our participants are humans. And so while there are ethics in terms of there's animal research and things like that, humans have specifically their own guidelines, which comes from the Nuremberg Code originally. And the Nuremberg Code included informed consent, the absence of coercion, and properly formulated experiments, and the minimization of harm. So those were some of the most basic things. Because, the Nazi doctors were saying, well, we were trying to learn things. This is how we conduct our experiments. And but the Nuremberg Code basically said, well, if you are conducting research and you have human participants, these are the basic requirements that you need to follow. And so then the Belmont Report is what came out after that. That was like in 1979 that the Belmont Report came out. And this was a report from the U.S. National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Science Research. So big long name, but that's the Belmont Report. And it established 3 basic ethical principles. And this is respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So respect for persons is basically that remember that you're dealing with humans, and so we need to treat people as autonomous agents and protect anybody that has diminished autonomy. So basically it's remembering that we're dealing with people, and people are every individual you deal with is an autonomous person. And if somebody has diminished autonomy, so like children, people with certain medical conditions or mental illnesses, people in maybe the elderly, if they're starting to have dementia or something like that, anything that diminishes sort of the normal autonomy that most adults have, then it was basically extra care has to be given for those populations if you want to study those groups. So that was the first basic ethical principle. The next one was beneficence, which basically is the idea that we want to minimize any possible harm and maximize any possible benefit. So when we're doing this weighing of harms versus benefits, we need as few harms as possible, or even potential harms, while maximizing benefits. Because if you're not getting benefits from your research, if there's like no really foreseeable benefits from the research, then even a little bit of harm is not justifiable. So if you want to justify some potential harm, like there's some research that'll have, potentially some questions could be triggering for somebody if they've had certain traumas in their background, or, something like that, where there's going to be help available and we're going to do what we can, but this might happen. That can be okay if you're going to get a whole lot of benefit out of that research and you can show that. So, but if you're not getting benefit, then even a little bit of harm, you can't justify that. So the beneficence is basically making sure that you have as few possible harms as possible, nothing unless it's absolutely necessary, and only then even minimal, and then maximizing those benefits to make any potential harm worth it. And then there is justice, which is the third basic ethical principle. And this is the idea that you want to distribute the benefits and risks of the research fairly. So you want to make sure that there's no one group that is going to be, benefiting more from the research than the other. And if there is, like in some situations, like if you're testing, a new drug in medical research, or which could be a treatment for something, or you're testing like a new program, let's say in prison, some kind of treatment program that's going to help reduce recidivism, then if those things are doing what the researchers think they're going to do, then the people getting those things will fare better. Like that's kind of the point of the research, is to show that people who, let's say there's an anger management program in prison, that people who get this treatment are going to do better than the people who didn't in terms of recidivism rates and likelihood of recidivism. So if it works, then yeah, one group is going to get more out of the research than the other group, who either got a placebo or didn't get anything at all, and they're the comparison group. But the idea of justice is that it's fairly distributed in terms of the likelihood of getting either the treatment or the placebo or nothing. So if it's something, everybody basically has a random chance, and everybody has the same chance of getting treatment group or comparison group, and that's kind of the justice element of it. So it shouldn't be that certain people are more likely to get more risks from the research or to get more benefits. It should be fairly distributed, that everybody kind of has the same likelihood, and then it just depends on how things happen. So justice basically means that you are being fair in the distribution of benefits and risks. And so then the Belmont Report translated into the Federal Policy for the Protection of Human Subjects in 1991, which is now called the Common Rule, because people don't want to say the Federal Policy for the Protection of Human Subjects, because that's a big mouthful. So that's become the Common Rule, and that's what's still in effect today. And basically it takes everything that the Belmont Report had in it, and they clarified some things and they added some things, but that's now the Common Rule, and that's what we have in terms of our ethics requirements today. And so then one way that we kind of make sure that everybody is following the Common Rule, as well as general ethics in general, is we have institutional review boards, which are called research ethic boards in Canada, and I believe in the UK. So, but any types of sort of IRB or REB, whichever it is, these are basically committees that look over research proposals before the research has been done. So nothing has been done. There's been no participants yet. So this happens before, to make sure that the research that's going to happen, that somebody is proposing, is abiding by all of those ethical principles, and making sure that there's compliance with the federal policy, with the Common Rule, and making sure that that no harm is going to come to participants outside of sort of that minimal harm, and that's sort of justifiable if there's that maximum benefits. So basically these committees pour through the proposed research, any proposed research within their institution, and make sure that there is going to be no foreseeable ethical breach if they go forward with the research as proposed. And so this is required for every institution, and this is specifically talking about the United States, but this is true in most first world countries that conduct research. It's required for every institution that seeks federal funding for research on human subjects. So if there is any kind of federal funding at all, and then research is done using human subjects, which would include all universities and colleges. It would include also there are some places that just do research, so it's not tied to a university, but if they're like a research institution or research body that is receiving federal funding, they would be held to the same standards. So anytime basically there's research done with anybody tied to an institution that has any kind of federal funding, they have to have these IRBs, and they have to get that approval before conducting any research. Importantly, the IRB is independent. This means that there is nobody on the IRB that is connected in any way to the research being proposed. It has to be totally independent, so that there is no bias involved in sort of like letting things slide through the IRB when they might potentially be harmful. So the IRB has to have that step back and be independent, completely independent from the any of the researches that are being proposed. And I mean, that doesn't mean, you have people that are on IRBs that wanted to conduct their own research. They would just then recuse themselves for the study, for the review specifically of the study that they're proposing. That would be how that would work. So you have to receive approval from the IRB before any data is collected. That's the key, is you can't be already starting to have gathered data if you don't yet have IRB approval. The IRB approval has to happen first before you talk to a single person about your research, as a participant. So that approval has to come first. And so appropriate subcommittees, there's sometimes subcommittees within the IRB, they will review ethics applications, and this ensures that people that have the specific relevant knowledge in terms of the methods and procedures, as well potentially of the content, they're ensuring compliance with the federal policy. So typically you'll have, the IRB will consist of people with varying backgrounds, so that you typically want somebody, at least one person who is an expert in the field, or at least a related field. But then you also want people from other fields so that they can kind of look at it from a broader spectrum of potential breaches of ethics policies. So IRBs, super important, due before any research is conducted, any data is collected at all. And that's how we ensure ethical research is being done.